All right, let's dive into a legal case that honestly has it all. We're talking about a family feud, a big fight over inheritance, and a Supreme Court decision that all comes down to the meaning of a single, super common word. It's an incredible story about how one little word can literally change everything. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, right? Why on earth would grandkids sue their own grandparents to stop an adoption? But that is the exact puzzle we're looking at today. It's this incredible conflict between family loyalty on one side and, well, cold, hard cash on the other. And it forced the courts to grapple with some really big ideas, not just about the law, but about what a family is even for.
So to really get this, we've got to go back in time. The year is 1971, and we're in the Philippines. What started out as a private family argument, well, it just spiraled. It got bigger and bigger until it ended up in front of the Supreme Court. I mean, this was no small disagreement. This was a full-blown, serious legal showdown.
Okay, so let's meet the key players here. First, you've got the grandparents, Antero and Amanda Aganoy. All they wanted was to adopt two young boys, Carino and Wilson, and give them a family. But on the other side of the courtroom, their very own grandsons, Roderick and Rommel Daoang, and they were fighting this adoption with everything they had. The big question is, why?
And that brings us right to the heart of it. What was this big family dispute all about? Why would these grandsons be so against what seems like a really kind thing to do?
Well, the connection here is really direct, and it's pretty personal. You see, the boy's mother, Estrella, was the Ganoy's only daughter, and after she tragically passed away, her sons, Roderick and Rommel, were next in line to inherit everything from their grandparents.
And there it is. It all came down to money. From the grandson's point of view, these two new adopted kids weren't just new family members. No, they were competition. They were two more people who'd get a piece of the inheritance that the grandsons felt belonged to them. Basically, adopting them meant their slice of the family pie was about to get a whole lot smaller. Okay, so the grandsons knew they couldn't just walk into court and say, hey, this is about our inheritance. They needed a real legal argument, a weapon they could use. And they thought they found the perfect one, hidden in the text of the law itself. This is it. This is the law their entire case was built on, Article 335. At first glance, it seems pretty straightforward, right? It says that people who have, quote, legitimate children, well, they can't adopt. That was the line in the sand. That was the legal foundation for their whole argument. But here's the twist. This is where their legal strategy got, well, really creative. They argued that the word children in that law shouldn't just mean children. They claimed it was a broader term that should include all descendants, like them, the grandchildren. And if they could convince the court of that, then bam, their grandparents would be legally disqualified from adopting. It was a clever move. So you see what's happening? This whole huge legal fight, a case that made it all the way to the nation's highest court, really boiled down to a battle over one little word and what it truly means. So you've got these two totally opposite interpretations. On one side, the grandchildren are saying, hey, children is a big umbrella term. It includes us. But the grandparents are saying, no, no, no. Children means your immediate kids, your sons and daughters. That's it. Grandchildren are, well, they're grandchildren. Everything, and I mean everything, depended on which definition the court was going to go with. So that begs the question, right? When a word in the law is the very thing everyone's fighting about, how does a court figure out who's right? It's not like they can just flip a coin. There's actually a process, a way they break these things down. All right, this is the moment we've been waiting for. How did the court actually decide? Let's walk through exactly how the Supreme Court sorted this whole mess out. Okay, so the big reveal. The Supreme Court sided with the grandparents. The adoption was allowed to go forward. The grandchildren lost their case. But just knowing who won isn't the interesting part. The real story here is why they won. See, the court didn't just pull this decision out of thin air. They had a system, a really clear three-step way of thinking about it. First, they looked at the plain meaning of the word. Then they dug into the law's history. And finally, they asked, what's the whole point of this law anyway? Step 1, the plain meaning rule. This is a huge deal in legal interpretation, and it's actually pretty simple. It basically says, look, don't make it more complicated than it is. If a word in a law is clear and has an obvious meaning, you just have to use that meaning. You're not supposed to go hunting for some secret hidden definition. So when they applied that rule to this case, the court said, look, the word children isn't confusing.
In everyday English and in the law, children means your immediate kids. Grandchildren are called, well, they're called grandchildren for a reason. So based on that rule alone, the grandson's whole argument pretty much fell apart. But the court wasn't done. They kept digging.
And this is where they found what was basically the smoking gun. The court went back in time and looked at the old law, the one that came before this one. And guess what? The old law used the word descendants. Now, if that word were still in the law, the grandparents would have been disqualified and the grandsons would have won. But the key is the new law, the one they were actually dealing with, had been changed. Descendants was taken out and children was put in.
And here's the kicker. That change wasn't a typo. It wasn't an accident. The court concluded that the lawmakers did this on purpose. They made a very deliberate choice to swap descendants for children because they wanted to shrink the list of people who couldn't adopt. They specifically wanted to allow more people, including grandparents, to be able to adopt. And that brings us to the third and final piece of the court's reasoning. They stepped back and looked at the big picture. They asked a really fundamental question. What's the whole point of adoption anyway? Because, as it turns out, the answer to that has changed a lot over the years. You see, back in the day, adoption was mostly for the benefit of the parents. It was a tool for people who didn't have heirs. It was about continuing the family name, making sure their property had someone to go to. Honestly, the child's own welfare was kind of an afterthought.
But that's the old way of thinking. The modern idea, the one the court really leaned into, is the complete opposite. Today, the law is crystal clear. Adoption is first and foremost about the well-being of the child. It's about finding them a loving home, giving them a shot at a happy, stable life.
And this really ties it all together, doesn't it? When the court made its final decision, they weren't just arguing about the dictionary definition of a word. They were making a statement. They were choosing to support this modern, child-first philosophy. They put the future and happiness of those two little boys, Quirino and Wilson, ahead of the grandchildren's inheritance. And so, this whole incredible case leaves us with a really big question to think about. Here, everything lined up perfectly, right? The literal meaning of the word, the letter of the law, matched up with the spirit of the law. But what about when they don't? Should judges always stick to the exact words on the page? Or should they focus on the deeper purpose behind the law? It's a fundamental question that gets right to the heart of what justice is all about.